welcome back to the 706 podcast. It's been about 5.5, 6 years since I did this, so have to pardon me for being a little rusty. But fortunately, I've got my three co-hosts to kind of buoy me along here as I stumble through my analysis of this film. Would you guys care to introduce yourselves?
Anthony.
I'm Connor.
Hey, folks. It's Kirk.
Hey, guys. Welcome back. So today, we're going to be discussing Michael Mann's 2004 kind of action thriller neo-noir film, Collateral, starring Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx and a bunch of other people. And before I get into how I feel about it, I'm just going to, go around the panel here and ask my co-hosts what they thought of the movie. So whoever would like to start, take it away. Kirk, I know you're a fan of this movie, so maybe we'll let Kirk start. Start on a good note.
Should I start? Okay. Excuse me. Yeah. Not much of a surprise upon probably my fifth viewing. I'm not sure. Great, interesting, gritty, derealizing movie. The general plot, for those who haven't seen it or not even interested in seeing it, is a cab driver in LA is basically held hostage by a hitman while he attempts to carry out 5 hits in a single night, having the cab driver drive him around various parts of the greater LA area. So yeah, I one of the main interests for me is just getting, and even going back to when I was 14 and first saw this movie, was kind of exposure to seeing a realistic version of Los Angeles, one kind of devoid of the glitz and glamour that we often see depicted in movies. La La Land, this is not. This takes place in the crevices, as it were, of LA. And I liked tracking kind of, I have a keen interest in maps, and this movie's all about kind of the general dislocation one can feel when in LA, as it's so kind of disparate and spread out. And so I kind of followed the journey along through the 5 hits, and they really do go everywhere. And the movie's pretty accurate. I mean, there are some fumbles here and there, but I do enjoy this movie. We can get into more later, but I would just say that if you're looking for kind of a gritty, well-written, well-shot action thriller from the early 2000s with an eccentric cast, this is definitely your film. So there you go.
And well, how about you, Anthony? You'd seen this before, correct?
Yeah, but it was like years and years ago, I realized now.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of curious, because I was thinking about Kirk a lot during this movie, particularly the beginning, and because he told us he was studying those maps. But I grew up, I guess not in the city, but basically going to the city quite often, and I was trying to figure out how accurate that was. So I'm very interested in Kirk expanding on that later on. But as for the movie itself, I was thinking it's like I completely remembered or misremembered, I should say, is like a lot of the movie, because in my head, the first 35 minutes probably, the post or after he meets Jada Pinkett Smith's character, and he first arrives with Tom Cruise in the car to the first killing, and a little shortly after, made up in my head the majority of the movie. And I had remembered a sort of more tightly taught thriller in the cab, and this kind of psychological game Tom Cruise is playing, which was still there in my in this viewing, but obviously that goes away much more quickly, and it sort of quickly becomes a much, in some ways, more typical action film, or thriller, it would be a more accurate term. And at times it worked, at times it didn't. I think things worked better when I didn't think about them too hard. honestly, and I liked a lot of the set pieces as set pieces. But when I think about them together, they don't always come together in the right way for me. But what I do love is, of course, Tom Cruise's performance, and I can't remember if this is right after the whole infamous couch scene.
This is pre-crazy Katie Holmes.
Okay, so it is interesting.
There's crazy, just pre-Katie Holmes.
It's pre-Katie Holmes.
BC,
yeah,
before couch.
And there's like this period of time where like Tom Cruise is like a really fascinating actor here, and I think it's like one of those movies that kind of proves it. But the final point is I was going to get to is just like how much this movie depends on its like time setting of like 2003, 2004, because just like 3 to 4 years later, this movie would be impossible with just the amount of like forensic technology that developed, the amount of cameras in LA, the cell phones that would be, you know, appearing in a few years, and on and on. So it's very interesting. It almost feels like a different LA to me. In LA, like I never really, you know, got to experience. But anyway, I'll get more later.
Okay, great. And Connor?
As for me, I'd say this movie changed my life. After I saw the ending, I took off my glasses and I became a Chad. And I've learned the error of my ways. Tom Cruise was the hero we all needed. He's a sort of rebel against society, and he tells it how it is. And the speeches in this movie, man, are so deep. Like the references to the I Ching, and I guess the movie knows that's a bit you know, over the top or whatever. But no, I mean I really like the action stuff. It's so much style. You know, I don't know why people call it neo-noir. I was kind of watching with that in mind, and I don't really kind of get that exactly. But no, I mean, who doesn't love Tom Cruise's performance in this movie? I thought it was incredible. Just that really intense, kind of just really wiry, just really high-strung, kind of killer yuppie kind of character that he plays so well. And I can't really think of a similar role that he's played like this. And yeah, so there's lots of things I really like that on kind of like a technical or execution level. Mm-hmm. But I guess I still have doubts about the kind of like the meaning of the movie or what have you. And I have a feeling Tony might be able to like sway me, you know, and sort of convince me or make it all make sense, you know.
Sure. We'll see. Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I don't have like a really solid, really locked in reading of this movie per se. I think this is, to use my favorite word, this is a tremendously visceral experience. It is at the end of the day of a genre exercise. But
sure,
what I love about Michael Mann's films is that he is someone who he works in genre, right? But he is an absolute like fanatical commitment to genre, to action films, to heist films, and to these styles, and just executing them as well as he possibly can. And in doing that, he imbues these things, these kind of stereotypical elements, these things we've seen in a million other stories, with a life that we wouldn't typically see. Like in the hands of a different director, the Tom Cruise like executions might be really rote and really like whatever, but Tom Cruise and Michael Mann create this really singular, kind of unnerving but fascinating character that, you know, while there's nothing about him that is like super original per se or super distinctive, it's embodied with this sense of life and unpredictability, and also just it feels very lived and it feels very real. And I was reading an essay earlier about the way like Michael Mann has this image of like a man with a gun in all his movies, but like what makes that different than all the other men with guns is like essentially they look like a person would really fire a gun, which we rarely see in movies. Like there's something very striking about the way people fire guns and the sound the guns make in this movie, which is like, how is this not every movie? How is not every movie do this, you know? And then of course the other, and that essay, by the way, I think it was Grant Nebel, it was called Michael Mann, The Professionals. It kind of ties this into the whole, all the other Michael Mann movies. They're all about professionals, essentially, of different types. And here, of course, we got the professional cab driver and the professional assassin, in the way like they grow to respect each other in their various capacities. But the other thing that's notable about this film, I think too, is the visuals. This is shot digitally, of course. This is part of Michael Mann's digital era. He's gotten very fond of shooting things digitally, and what his cinematography, while he works with different cinematographers, there's kind of an aesthetic continuity to his later works, where they have this very particular look. And they don't even though pretty much every movie is shot digitally now, and that's no longer like a unique thing, Michael Mann movies still look like Michael Mann movies, and there's something very odd about it. This movie in particular, I think, is probably the best example of it, because you're seeing the lights in LA at night, and the way the colors kind of pop off in this movie is very like electric and very like kind of cool to look at. And even like throughout the movie, you're seeing the faces light up in these really distinctive and vibrant ways. And particularly beautiful is the ending of the movie, where they're walking out and the dawn is coming out, and you see this like incredible blue sky, and it's like, it doesn't look like a sunrise we've seen in like any other movie. And I think there's something really commendable about that. And I think also he creates these really authentic moments, like almost by happenstance, of real kind of grace and beauty in this genre context. Like when they're in the car and the coyotes walk across the street, I love it. I love the coyotes. I love the lights in their eyes, and when they make eye contact and they just have this moment together. Anyway, so yeah, so I don't know, but did you guys pick up on those elements at all? Did you see there as being kind of something more to it than a genre exercise, or did it just feel like kind of a competently done version of that?
As kind of transcending the genre. As I think the aspect to me where Michael Mann is kind of showing off, or he's trying to kind of transcend the genre. I don't know, to me, the biggest aspect, it may not be the aspect that I would think is the coolest, or maybe that you would think is the coolest, Tony, but where I see that happening is in the kind of the sort of almost allegorical quality of or the kind of universal, or whatever you want to call it, quality of the dynamic between Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx, right? Their interplay. And it's a lot like Heat, for example, or it's all about this kind of character study of these two characters who are recognizable types, that can be kind of thought of in the abstract and kind of applied or sort of worked with as kind of almost allegorical, kind of stand-ins. And and that's where you got a sense ultimately that the action stuff almost doesn't matter in a way. I mean, it is really important that how the movie is functioning. It's the vehicle for this kind of exploration, I guess. But maybe I'm I'd say that was his goal. Maybe I'm setting the bar too high for him, I guess.
No. I think you've glommed onto something important, because he does often do this. You like in Heat, you say like you have these two characters who are kind of opposed to each other and they represent different ideas. Now Heat is different in that both characters are these very classical Michael Mann figures of like these perfect machines that do their job, and that's what they do. And the Tom Cruise character is a very good example of that in this movie. But Jamie Foxx is kind of in the process of becoming someone who can do what he wants to do. And he is that professional in terms of his cab driving, but he doesn't have the commitment. He doesn't have the ability to go the next level in the way that Tom Cruise kind of urges him to do throughout the movie. And the movie, that's kind of what he learns from Tom Cruise, obviously. He becomes kind of someone who's willing to come into himself and embody who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that was kind of weird. I think, we're fighting against these villains, Tom Cruise is set up as kind of a villain with a sort of bad worldview, right? It's kind of nihilistic worldview. It doesn't matter if anyone dies. Everyone is disconnected, so it doesn't really matter. Who cares who I kill? Do you care, right? No, you don't, right? You don't care about the people dying in Rwanda, right? You don't care about who I kill either, right? And I guess that's something against which, Jamie Foxx is supposed to rebel or to prove wrong, by the end, which he kind of does by saving the girl that he, hardly knows, right? By Jada Pinkett Smith. So, I think it's like, sorry, I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but that's definitely what he's trying to get at, or that's the opposition. And also the fact that his whole arc, Jamie Foxx's arc, I mean, you mentioned that, like, he is very professional as a cab driver, but then also his arc is too, is he's kind of like, I think he's kind of like a schlub, that he's unmotivated and
Yeah.
he doesn't like pursue the things he really ought to pursue, and he lies to his mom and things like that. And that somehow in the end it's like, I guess Tom Cruise had a lesson to teach, and that Jamie Foxx had to be a little bit more of a narcissist or a sociopath, or or to lose that maybe a schlubby side of himself. I mean, but it's weird that they make that equation.
Yeah, it is interesting, but I think that this is not Michael Mann's movies don't typically make these kind of like moral judgments on its characters, right? Like Tom Cruise is framed as the bad guy, but I feel like the way he functions in this movie is he is just an actor. He is committed to he's like a machine. He's going to do what he's going to do, right? It's like, it's almost the way he conceptualizes it is almost irrelevant, right? So we as the audience can say, yes, he's a bad man. He's doing these bad things, but that's not relevant in terms of what he has to teach Jamie Foxx. He has the level of commitment that Jamie Foxx, it's that kind of commitment and that dedication, and that, it's the fear that's holding Jamie Foxx back. And he learns to let that go throughout the movie. And I think by the end, he does develop kind of a sense of gratitude for this man, or a sense of I think they do share like this kind of this bonds. But I don't know. I want to bring in, I feel like we've been going back and forth for a while. Sure. I mean, Anthony, what did you think of their kind of relationship or dynamic, or how does the movie want us to feel about this? Are we supposed to kind of take what Tom Cruise has at face value? Does the movie like refute that? Does that matter? What is the role of that, do you think?
Well, I think coming out of it, I definitely was more on the side of Connor, of trying to figure out the sort of dynamic exact relationship between the two. But I could definitely agree with you on the side of, or on the idea of, Michael Mann wanting to sort of disregard the larger sense of morality for the face characters themselves, which is, what kind of persona do you put on for people to see as you're going through the world? I mean, I think it's clear when we see Javier Bardem's character, for instance, which hardly ever shows up, but is so crucial to the whole movie. And it's all about the sense of, what does the genre in itself end up completing as these characters sort of walk through it, if that makes sense. But the thing for me that I have trouble with, I think, is on one hand, the genre itself, which is sort of the classic also Hitchcock, the innocent man, wrong timing, gets thrown down the rabbit hole sort of type, of plot line. I'm really uninterested, I realize, when the movie gets to its actual action set pieces, which don't really do much for me. And I think I lose the feeling of, I don't know how to put this, but I'm much more interested, I guess to say, is when Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx aren't just polar opposites, but are constantly tugging and pulling at each other. As opposed to when those action scenes come, I feel like they're two on the opposite side. And that for me becomes a kind of annoying cliche that Mann's sort of not really doing much with. And I don't know if I'm really coherent here because I'm still trying to unravel it.
Well, the only scene I can think of where they're truly opposed is at the very end. The whole movie, I feel like they're kind of in these, I mean, Jamie Foxx in particular is in this weird state of flux throughout the movie where we're always kind of on his side, but he isn't like truly fighting Tom Cruise. I think that like if the Jamie Foxx that emerges at the end of the movie, having completed his arc, if he were to find himself in this situation again, he would have fought Tom Cruise right away, and he never would have let himself be put in that situation. You know what I mean?
But I think that's part of the thing is like the viewing experience itself of watching him is kind of on the other side. I mean, also when like they're at that Korean nightclub and he's coming out, he's completely, I think, on the other side. And Mark Ruffalo gets shot in that moment. I think the difference there is I think he's still trapped, but I still think he's on the other side. And I think we're just getting his anger, which is in flux throughout it. And that's the part I'm actually interested in, what you're pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, I think in particular of like, you mentioned the Javier Bardem scene.
Mm-hmm.
That to me might be my favorite scene in the whole movie, both for that amazing, it's almost a cameo practically, his amazing monologue, but also that's such an amazing beat for the Jamie Foxx character. I mean, it's one of my favorite shots of all time is when he's in silhouette, he turns and he threatens the guy with the gun behind him. because that's such an amazing verbal moment, you know, of like him just coming into his own in a way that feels like completely new and completely unprecedented. And it's conveyed visually too, with just the shape of Jamie Foxx's face, the way his lips are pursed out. I think it's like it's a perfect moment. But that's a moment too where it's sort of like kind of ambiguous, because it's like he's fighting for a self-preservation, and on the lower level, like, okay, I want to avoid collateral damage, I want to avoid him killing, you know, innocent people. But he is kind of buying into this dark side. He is playing with this, you know, this like shadow self that Tom Cruise sort of represents. But Kirk, I feel like you haven't chimed in that much. I mean, how do you feel about their dynamic, and like how do you see their relationship kind of shift throughout the movie?
Yeah, I think the crux of the movie, the most interesting moments within the movie take place inside the cab. I think this could almost be expanded into like a play, a one set play. You know what I mean? I really think there's a lot that you can unpack here. Even, of course, racial overtones.
Yes.
The idea of this ubermensch white kind of anonymous person versus this insecure, overburdened, unsure of himself, kind of schizotypal person in a way. I think it's an interesting look at the reciprocality between characters. See, I don't see it as just a one-way street, in the sense that Tom Cruise is imparting knowledge to Jamie Foxx's character. You know, that he's teaching him how to become a Chad, as Connor mentioned earlier, like someone who can hold a gun and protect his woman. And like, I see the main lessons that he's giving to Jamie Foxx is the idea of being able to let go of insecurities and focus on, ultimately allow mindful indifference to guide you towards your goals, and be goal oriented. But I also see Jamie Foxx giving, you know, knowledge to Tom Cruise. I think, just as we're meant to be so fascinated by Vincent's character, even the way he looks is so stark and monolithic in a way. He's just as fascinated by the eccentricities, the minutia that comprise Max's personality. I think he finds his raw humanity as intriguing and compelling as we find Vincent's machine-like ruthlessness. And so I tried to lean into that upon this, you know, during this viewing, and see, you know, what there was for us. And in that sense, I think it's really well done, because there is, you know, it's a look at a sociopath, but you know, high functioning, someone who's obviously had some trauma earlier in their lives. You know, it's kind of mentions it side hand, but I think there are lessons to be learned on both sides, and I think that I only really saw it from the lens of like, oh, here's this killer that's teaching Jamie Foxx to be a killer, or to be like, you know, ruthless, whereas maybe he's teaching Tom Cruise to allow himself. They're both teaching each other to be vulnerable, and it's like they need this contrast to be able to see their flaws. So I think that's kind of cool. But yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, no, you're definitely right, and there's definitely, they learn from each other, and I think that they learn to kind of appreciate each other in a way by the end. And Tom Cruise does take an interest in Jamie Foxx and in his life, and in what he's interested in, of course.
And that's why he doesn't kill him, you know, because
right, because he doesn't answer right when he asks.
There are so many opportunities. He would easily just be dead. I mean, the the risk of driving around in a cab with a smashed windshield throughout the movie. But I don't necessarily love to get into nitpicking details like that. But yeah, I think that does speak to like his irrationality throughout the film is because he's enthralled with Max. By Max.
Let me nitpick for you, Kirk. Just two things is like, one is it's implied though too from like Mark Ruffalo's detective that there's another, this has all kind of happened to a different character that we never see, because he talks about the other cab driver that also went on like a killing spree.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it's unknown like why he would do this. But two, I was thinking about what you were saying before, and it's like also like the sort of economic / racial colonization of Tom Cruise to Jamie Foxx, because it's like interesting to me is that he's only going to make what $600-700 from the night with the tip. And like, that also though, I mean, I know it's 2004, but that's not a lot of money. So it's like actually puts it in perspective, like, how like of a working class man this guy is. But also it's like, it sort of puts in a different play when you think about that. And when Tom Cruise is belittling him for how much money he's saving, well, it's like, well, how is this guy supposed to save money? He's only making a couple $100s a night. His mom's in the hospital. It's like, is this cabbie or is this limo fantasy actually a sort of feasible fantasy for him? Or is it also just economically out of the realm of possibility if you really think about it?
Yeah,
I have like a lot of these questions in the back of my head. I know they're kind of like nitpicky, but I think they're economically like sort of there.
No, I think there's definitely kind of a subtextual, like temporarily embarrassed billionaire or millionaire sort of vibe to the Jamie Foxx guy, where he has this dream that, like, I think even when he's first describing it, sounds somewhat kind of unattainable. And like, as we go on, we found out how long he's been working as a cabbie. It's kind of, we see kind of how much he's been kind of maybe lying to himself or maybe giving himself some kind of something to cling on to, some kind of dream.
And he's signing those celebrities' photographs for his mom.
Oh, dude, I missed that detail.
There's one, it looks like Mishka Barton in the background.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Do we know, little aside, do we know who, speaking of the cast, do we know who Mark Ruffalo's partner was?
Oh, yes. Connery's your hero.
It's a friend of the show. I know. It's Peter Berg of Battleship fame. One of his greatest turns.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I think it's like the only time he's acted, or one of the only times.
He has a couple. It's weird. He has a couple roles. I haven't seen a lot of his acting, honestly.
Also,
he's good in this movie.
Yeah.
What, Kirk?
We all know who the bagman was in the first scene, of course.
Jason Statham, dude. That was crazy. Yeah, when I never seen this movie before, and I was like shocked. Like, wait a minute. Where's Jason Statham? I was waiting for him to show up again.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought he was going to come in and kill and, like, kill Tom Cruise at the end or something. But
yeah.
But one other thing, I think circling back, because as we discuss it, it unravels a little bit for me. To go back to Connor's sort of question about, like, well, what does it all mean or what? And I've kind of been coming on to this idea as we talk about the dynamic between these guys. But I think that while they're both real people, they also represent something for the other. They represent a part of themselves that they can either deny or embrace. And Tom Cruise may still have some Jamie Foxx in him, but he's pretty much reached a point where he knows how he wants to live his life. And Jamie Foxx has the Tom Cruise in him, and he's afraid of him. He's afraid of being that guy because he's like, I don't want to be a murderer. I don't want to go around killing people. But like, because that's the extreme, because he's an absolute, he's the polar, he's the far end of the spectrum. If you were to become Tom Cruise, you wouldn't want to do that because you'd be a sociopath. But it's the question of like, how much of that part of myself do I have to kind of embrace, or do I have to kind of get in touch with in order to make my way in the world? Because if you're so terrified of that, if you want to avoid it at all costs, you'll never do anything, because you'll be afraid, you'll be paralyzed into inaction, and you will stay basically complacent in your place in life, and you'll never go after your dreams. You'll never call the girl. You'll never, start the cab company or whatever that is for you, right? So I do think that is something that is very, I don't know, for me, very relatable, right? Because I mean, I'm obviously the Tom Cruise guy in real life. I'm obviously him. And I have to ask myself,
tamp it down a little bit
today, and I always say no.
Yeah, also, okay, one thing, like, what are we supposed to expect is going to happen with Jamie Foxx?
At the end
because
of the night,
all the other cops, thinks he was the killer. I mean, they could
Yeah,
find out that he
exactly.
wasn't, I guess, fairly easily. But then also, he's still the guy in the trunk of his car. I mean, I guess he can always explain all of these things, but it's just like, it's weird because it doesn't end on a very triumphant note in that, you're expecting that it doesn't feel resolved, at the end. I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it could be seen as being completely resolved, but.
Yeah, as they let Tom Cruise leave on the train.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to stay there and explain it. But
Yeah.
also, like, didn't like half the nightclub see like Tom Cruise like shoot up the guy, and like he's supposed to be this great anonymous hitman.
Yeah, the movie's not without its flaws for sure. I mean, giving Javier Bardem says how much money they put into surveillance and electronic monitoring, and the best place to kill this Peter Lim was at the back of a crowded nightclub, I guess. That, but
well, I guess the idea is he's short on time, right? And that's where he happens to be. And if he has to get this done, I don't know. I can roll with it because that gives us the nightclub scene. Do you not want to have the nightclub scene? I don't want to.
No. It's one of those common afflictions where the more you watch a movie, perhaps sometimes the more you kind of dig into it a little bit.
Definitely, yeah.
If I were to harken back to when I first saw this, it was majestic, and it still is. Definitely, it's not my favorite Michael Mann of the early 2000s. That award would go to Miami Vice, but I really, really do, as someone who appreciates geography, travel, all this stuff. I really do appreciate how they kind of embodied the city in this movie, and it kind of reminds me of an older film called The Warriors and what it did for New York. I kind of saw the contrast. Both were shot, or both took place putatively over the course of a night, and were about travel and kind of against all odds and on the clock. And I really thought there is kind of an adrenaline rush and really you can feel the velocity of throughout the movie. It kind of takes you on a journey with you, with it, I guess. But yeah.
I like when you said it takes place in a single night. That's another kind of duality that I think this movie embodies too, that I think is really amazing, is that it's this very contained story. At its core, it's about these two guys and they're in a cab and it's one night. It's the most like lean, like tight, like structure or concept for a movie you could have. And yet like there are all these allusions to this really broad, like international, like crazy stuff going on, and like this whole world that comes colliding in on them. And we know about it. We don't know all the details, but we know it's out there. And I think that tension between the kind of the confined and the kind of crazy international criminal conspiracies is a lot of fun. And in the nightclub scene is a good embodiment of that, because you have literally all these forces converging on this one location, getting closer and closer. It's a masterful, like, ratcheting up of tension before it explodes.
It sure is.
I love that scene. That's cool. Great use of music, too.
The music in general is really good, I think.
I'll mention it last. That means I like it. I like the movie.
The soundtrack, I think, has its moments where it's a little
corny, right? It's a little bit
Soundgarden, Chris Cornell.
I liked that though. I wouldn't normally like it, but in this context, with the coyote, I'm like, I kind of get it. I kind of feel it. There's something about it.
Those were the nicest coyotes like I've ever seen. Like, I grew up like in Southern California. They'd always be like this skinny, like really scrawny
Anthony was
coyotes.
constantly fighting off coyotes.
Those were shows.
Honestly, guys, that's how I test a new person. I introduce them to my coyote. And if my coyote doesn't like him, he's no good. So that says more than about you, Anthony. All right, I think we can vote. I'm sorry, I feel like I've been hogging the mic tonight. Why don't we do some kind of quick final thoughts and we'll do a vote. I kind of feel like I know where it's going, but we'll see.
I'll go. I mean, just to sum up, under the radar MVP for this movie would be the group of skinheads wandering down Hollywood Boulevard in West Hollywood. That seemed a little out of place, but I'll roll with it. Also, Jada Pinkett Smith's Sepulveda to Slauson to La Brea to 6 downtown. That route is so stupid. And even when I was younger, I was like, there's no one would ever do this. Why would you take surface streets when you could obviously she's coming from LAX, I think, and she's going downtown to I think the US Bank building, which is the tallest building west of the Mississippi River in America. And you could easily take the 105 to the 110, but she's like, no, take these streets. You know, I want to just be lost in thought. So, really immersion breaking. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that is very cool how they argue cab routes. I'm just kind of going back and forth here, but obviously it's a yes for me. It's a great movie. There's a lot of different angles for me to enjoy this movie, whether it's the visceral action, the witty banter, the moral undertones, and then the obviously cinematic, atmospheric cinematography on display.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, Kirk, I think, actually touches on a point. It's funny because I think this is actually no way influencing like the sort of vote, but it's like LA finally represented very beautifully real, but simultaneously the most unrealistic portrayal of LA at times, which is like the random white people speaking Spanish in a way that like was like, wait, those people weren't speak Spanish. Those coyotes would never be there. Little things like that. I'm like, why are they hanging out by the Staples Center unless he wants to get robbed? You know, like all these things. I'm like, what's going on? But I actually was kind of like middle, like yes or no, like going back and forth. And then some of Connor's complaints actually pulled me back into the no category a bit more hard. And there's certain things I just can't wrap myself around in thought. I was actually getting ready to give Tony the first yes since Connor calculated it, but I'm sort of a soft no.
Okay, I can take it. I mean, I knew it wouldn't happen, Anthony. It's okay. It's never gonna happen. I made my peace with it. It's all right.
Yeah. I mean, Tony shows every first date this movie and demands they like it.
Some of my movies for a first date.
It's this
of
and
all
he.
The Tony movies, of all the Tony movies I've watched with my family, this was probably the most family friendly.
It's a pretty accessible movie. I think pretty much anyone would like it.
Yeah.
On some level, but yeah.
Yeah, the violence isn't too like gory and it's not too garish in that way.
Yeah.
Well, how our family react to Tony's picks is a whole other podcast. It's an academic book.
So as for me, if you'll finally let me get a word in edgewise.
So anyway,
there's two kinds of people in this world. There's Santa Claus, and there's his sidekick, Pedro. And I'm inclined, I'm torn a little bit. I was a little bit down on it. I must have like spewed out all of my negativity and it was absorbed by Anthony. Changed his mind, but it was gone out of mine. And no, for real, it was Tony's eloquent sort of statement at the end there of how he felt, the parts of the self and the other, I was actually quite swayed by. So you know what? I'm gonna give it a yes.
All right. Wow, I'm kind of surprised, Connor. Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah, no, I kind of moved around thinking about it. I mean, I did really like enjoy the movie overall.
Mm-hmm.
I was just having sort of doubts about whether like if I really thought about it, would it amount to much in the end? I didn't have a lot of time to think about it, between watching it and the podcast. But
Well, great. Well, I'm glad it's in.
Yeah.
This isn't actually my favorite Michael Mann. My favorite Michael Mann is probably still Heat. I love that movie a lot, but they're pretty close. They're pretty different, but very similar.
Not Black Hat.
I can't get in. I'm not that much of an Armand White. I can't get into Black Hat. I can't get into Public Enemies. I'm sorry, guys. I wish.
Does Armand White love Public Enemies?
He probably.
I hope he
That would be
does.
cool.
I'm sure he does. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, now it's time for what we have called the fan favorite segment, in which these three will try to flatter me, cajole me, manipulate me in all kinds of ways to get me to pick their dang movies. So I think Anthony went least recently. So why don't you can decide who goes first?
I'll go last because I have to make sure my movie's available to actually watch.
That's always a problem. Yeah. Like last time, that was an issue.
I didn't check for mine either. Shit.
Oh, don't.
We can always. There are alternative means, if you know what I mean.
I don't.
not the. Yeah.
I don't want to get
we would ever resort
DMCA'd.
to such things. But okay, I'll go. Tony, you know this movie. I think we've discussed it before. I believe you've seen it, but deserves a shot in the 706. It is my favorite Coen Brothers movie. It is A Serious Man.
Ooh, okay.
2009? 2009? 2009. That sounds about right. Yep. It's my favorite. It kind of encapsulates all of the sort of the Coen-ness. It's a great story, great acting, great moments. It's right up my alley.
Cool. Kirk?
I'm gonna go ahead and suggest kind of I don't know if it's not necessarily it borders on kind of the zany and just the uncanny, but Over the Edge, 1979 movie. If you don't really know about it, it's basically the premise is a bunch of kids, disillusioned youth, kind of lock their parents and teachers and authority figures from the town in a middle school, I believe, and wreak havoc on the school and the town. And it's kind of a reversal of fortune, and very interesting. It's very interesting alongside films like Breakfast Club, attempt to try to present or project the struggles of being a youth in America. It's actually also, side note, I think it's Kurt Cobain's favorite movie ever. So there
yes.
You go.
Okay. So is this like a kind of a not John Hughes, actually him, but like that style?
No, it's more it's less subtle. I'll say that it's less subtle, but at the same time more striking.
Okay.
Let's just say, if you actually did see, I forget who the burnout was in the Breakfast Club. If you actually did see him finger the prom queen character, that's what this movie would be.
Nice.
That's quite a pitch, Kirk.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, he mentions that as one of his favorite films in Montage of Heck.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the second of Kurt Cobain's favorite films that, well, actually, no, never mind. I recommended Perfume, of which the novel that it was based on was a favorite of Kurt Cobain. So there's a theme here.
Yes, there is.
So we're switching podcast themes, All right. So I'm going to tailor my vote here. Connor's leaving. Never mind.
Sorry.
Tailoring my vote here to a movie I've been telling Tony to watch for a long time. I don't know if he's ever watched it, but he also loves watching sort of the lesser, more unknown, less talked about movies from big directors. It's a movie that Kirk would probably hate, or at least be strongly disinclined to like.
Cache 2?
No, it's Roman Polanski's The Tenant. And he stars in it. I can't remember if it's his first film before he fled to Europe, or if it's his last film before he fled to Europe. But he stars in it, and he basically plays this guy who decides to occupy this apartment where the former owner had committed suicide. It's a Kafka-esque sort of tale. It is strange. It's horrific. It's absolutely disgusting in places. And honestly, it just, I don't know if actually Tony would fully like it, but it has all the elements for a really good discussion with Tony and Connor and Kirk's fabulous rebuttals.
This is so curious. This is like the anti-Tony pick.
I guess it
is a Tony pick.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds really interesting. I mean, you mentioned that to me a few weeks ago, and I do want to see it. But honestly, it's.
Can we rebut?
Rebut. Before you say too much,
Tony already.
This is your time. This is your time, Kirk. Do it. Do it.
Well, I don't know what you're referencing as it, but I do have some hard hearing issues. So Connor, your movie, A Serious Man, it's about a guy who finally gets satellite radio. He has to choose between XM and Sirius. He goes with Sirius because it has Stern. It sounds a little mundane, a little banal. And then
I want to
Anthony,
see that movie.
Christopher Nolan's Tenet is
Oh.
it's only in theaters because he wants all of his fans to die. So we're not going to be able to rent that. It's not watch at home. So maybe pick something else, King of Staten Island, something like that. But
King of New York.
yeah, there you go, King of New York.
That was pretty good, Kirk. You had a few years off your game, but that was a good comeback, a late career comeback album.
Thank you.
All right.
You know, Connor, I feel like I gotta say, so A Serious Man. It's one of those movies I saw like junior or senior year of high school, and
Sure.
I walked around and I pretended so hard that I liked it.
Okay,
that it was
cool.
so cool, and I'm like, and in my head I'm like, what the hell? I was like, it's art, guys.
I like the honesty.
It's a little fact about that movie, though. I actually I went to St. Olaf College for the first part of my bachelor education, undergraduate schooling, and they filmed extensive parts of Serious Man at St. Olaf while I was there, and I actually saw the Coen brothers multiple times. So
Whoa.
And you told them you would
Whoa.
never watch it, right?
yeah, basically they're like, hey, we know how much you know about movies, and we really want you to induct us into the 706 when that becomes a thing. So
That's how the podcast got its start. That's why you
Yeah.
started it, didn't you, Kirk?
exactly.
Well, how have you not pitched it every time then, Kirk? I don't understand.
Because I was
Just waiting for me. He knew I would. This is
Had
why
to
I
be
was
you.
in on
Had
the.
to be you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Connor, you have a rebuttal? Oh wait, no.
Okay,
dude.
rebuttal. Roman Polanski. I mean, yeesh.
Yeah,
So, you know
also
what? either
That's the
shortly
obvious one.
before his escape to Europe, you know,
Yeah.
or
Well,
after.
It was either
Neither
this or J.K. Rowling movies. So.
neither
We're
of
kind
these
of a
things
different level of canceled, honestly.
I particularly want to contemplate. No, okay, of course you can separate the art from the man, so to speak.
Mhm.
That's fine, the art from the man. But if I had to pick one of the two, the one that fascinates me, I am pretty fascinated by Kirk's. I like it as a pick. It's pretty cool. Interesting
cool.
time because it seems kind of early for like the kind of the kind of 80s run of, you know, teen films. It's kind of interesting. But I think we know it's going to be kind of a wacky, wild ride. Will it feel like just a great movie that we can marvel at as just a masterpiece, just a grand piece of work? Maybe not. So I would say A Serious Man is pretty good on that level. I think it's like, you know, yes, it's deep. I would say it's deep in a way. I would say like if there's an issue of like, you know, what does it all mean? Obviously, it's supposed to be kind of hard to interpret, and that's kind of the idea. And it's a movie that I think you can enjoy on a very superficial, you know, kind of level as well. Or that's mostly how I enjoy it. There's just almost for the humor of it, I think is what I like the most about it.
Okay. And Anthony, did you rebut yet? I don't remember you saying anything.
He's had a lot of jabs, but he hasn't gone to the full rebuttal.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's. You know, I feel like Over the Edge. I've never seen the movie. I've seen a lot of clips of it. It's just, it's whatever. It's. I feel like Connor gave a good description of it. We'll have a few laughs. We'll have a few notes. Kirk, we'll talk about Nirvana a lot, which is
Yeah.
always fine by me.
yeah,
We'll talk
hell
about
yeah.
Kurt a lot, and you know, so that's a plus. I feel like my thing with the Coen brothers. So I'm always willing to give them a shot.
Sure.
And the thing, I always love their more, I don't even know, I wouldn't call them more serious, but more like action, more like genre pieces. Miller's Crossing, Blood,
No Country.
yeah, and
Sure.
like No
yeah.
Country for Old Men.
No
Whereas
Country,
the more traditional comedies have always left me sort of cold.
Interesting.
I've always had a really hard time getting into them. It's always a sort of willingness to come back to see if I come around to it.
Sure.
The way I did Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So, I mean, like I said, my memory of A Serious Man is high school Anthony, you know, thinking it was the deepest movie of all time. So
Then you're
pretty
so
much
much
it.
wiser. You'll realize how truly deep it is.
It's
Maybe
funny,
not.
yeah, or not. Yeah, but both could be interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's funny you said that, Anthony, actually, because I had a very similar experience with No Country for Old Men. That was the first R-rated film I saw in the theater as like a 13-year-old boy. I went with my mom and like my cousins, and for like a summer, I said it was my favorite movie. It seemed very adult and very serious.
Yeah.
I didn't really get it or anything, but it's like, yeah, No Country for Old Men.
I love the weapons
Yes.
in that movie. Like
Yeah.
that's why I thought the movie was good for the longest time. I'm like, yeah, man. Like
A shotgun with a
that's sick.
silencer.
There are some
Yeah.
dope weapons in that movie
Badass.
for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm sorry, Kirk. I'm going solely off the choices here. It's between Anthony and Connor. I gotta say, those just sound more up my alley than your film. But
Yeah. You mean shitty? Oh no,
you picked
sorry.
Inception.
Oh.
That's one of my favorite movies. I
No.
raved about it. No,
It's no night moves, but no. Go.
I still love that movie. You can rib it all day. See, never mind. I'm not going to get into that. We'll talk about that another time.
Go off, Tony.
No,
Save that for the riff zone.
that's the true favorite segment is the riff zone. Okay, so Anthony made a good case. That movie does sound super interesting. I definitely want to watch that on my own time soon. But I like the idea of, we've never done a Coen Brothers movie, and they're pretty like notable, pretty huge filmmakers. And A Serious Man isn't like a super, super obvious one like The Big Lebowski or Fargo or No Country for Old Men. So I think it's a good fit for the podcast. And I also think that there's a lot to it to discuss. So I kind of want to go A Serious Man. I think that's what we're going to do.
Cool.
Can we get like a boo sound clip?
Yeah.
Could be something. Yeah. It always feels a little anticlimactic when you get picked. A drum roll or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also kind of suspect that Anthony's, well, you alluded to it earlier, I suspect it'll be kind of hard to track down.
Actually, no, it's pretty available. You just got to rent
really?
it.
All right, never
Yeah.
mind. But
It
but
used to be
still,
on Prime. That's why I was checking.
And Tony, have you seen A Serious Man? I can't recall.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it for my editing class, actually.
Yes, I remember you discussing your professor talking about it. I remember
Yeah,
that.
he
I don't
assigned
remember whether
the
you had
first
seen
week.
it.
We had
So
to
this is another movie where Tony's going to bring in his old film notes.
Eh,
He's going
I
to call the
don't even know if I
professor ahead
have
of
them
time.
I'll
Get
make-
his arguments down.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next time with Serious Man. Thank you for joining me on this cab ride.
Wait, parting thought. Are we sure we didn't just get Tyler Durden and Tom Cruise isn't even real? Are we sure?
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, there's a lot of Fight Club.
Think about it.
It's
Think about
really
it.
deep, man. I told you.
All right, guys. See you next week.